The honourable member for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise tonight not really as the member of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound representing my constituents, or not even really as a Conservative member of Parliament. That's the privilege I have to be able to rise. I rose and asked the Minister of Foreign Affairs a question last week in reference to a quote that she made, where she stated that Canada, quote, is not a military power, unquote. As I stated in that question, Madam Speaker, I've had the privilege of leading some of Canada's finest warriors in Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And I'd like to educate the Minister, and that was the point that I made in that question, about the strength of our Canadian Armed Forces personnel and our Canadian military is based upon the fact that we are a military power. It was a simple question to the Minister, and that's why I'm here tonight, again, Madam Speaker, is just to give this Minister that opportunity to put it officially on the record to all our combat veterans across this great nation of ours that she will acknowledge that the Canadian Armed Forces personnel are amongst the best in the world and that we are a military power. Let me expand a little bit, just because there's lots of myths out there about what Canadian Armed Forces personnel and what we've been doing throughout the history of Canada. I think even more important as we're approaching the 105th anniversary of Vimy, where really Canada became a great nation because of our military power and our victory on Vimy Ridge 105 years ago next week. But in my own experiences, I turned to my first platoon warrant officer when I was in Oscar Company of the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Canadian Regiment, and we're in Bosnia. But before we got there, I was talking to my platoon warrant, and he explained when he first rolled in from Germany down into Bosnia, Croatia, during the conflicts of the mid and early 90s, and where he got into a situation where he got into that roadblock where they were being held up. And he took that opportunity, to push back with those forces that were trying to oppose them and say no, that they couldn't do their job in keeping the peace. He was able to point up to the ridgeline, Madam Speaker, to that anti-armor tow system that was geared up and pointed directly down onto that roadblock, and that military power allowed him to do his job in keeping the peace over there. What disappointed me very much, Madam Speaker, in the response is that the Minister chose to go partisan. As I said, my question had no context, no partisan angle to it. I wasn't asking as a Conservative, I was asking as a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. And she said, oh, this is rich coming from the Conservatives. I served from 1993 to 2019, started under then the Chrétien's government, and I lived through the decade of darkness under that Liberal government. I lived under the Harper government, where we got Chinooks, we got strategic lift, we got tanks delivered to us, and then I served even under this current government. In the end, Madam Speaker, all I'm asking for the Minister to do is acknowledge that we have some of the best military personnel in the world in our Canadian Armed Forces, and that we are a military power. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the member opposite for his question and for the opportunity to speak about Canada's role on the international stage. I know that everyone here today and all members have a profound respect and admiration for the work our military members do and for the dedication and sacrifices of all who have served. I will start here by thanking them, those currently serving as well as veterans, sincerely for their service. And I would also like to thank the member opposite for his service to Canada as a member of the Canada Armed Forces. For over 100 years, Madam Speaker, members of our military have served in some of the most difficult and dangerous circumstances imaginable. The Battle of Vimy Ridge, the harsh seas during the Battle of the Atlantic, protecting the skies in countless air operations during wartime and peace. From the liberation of the Netherlands to the Battle of Cap Young to combat operations in Kandahar, Canadian soldiers have been on the front lines of some of the most significant conflicts in modern history. And when disasters have struck here at home, they've deployed time and time again to help their fellow Canadians when they need it the most. Right now, we're seeing the impact that the Canadian Armed Forces efforts have had in Ukraine. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian security forces are leveraging the training they received through Operation Unifier as they fight for their country's right to freedom and self-governance against Russia's horrific invasion. While all the credit goes to the people of Ukraine, we are proud of the work that CAF has undertaken to train with their personnel. As the member opposite said in the House last week, Canadian Armed Forces personnel are among the best in the world. And I think we can all acknowledge that they are some of the most highly skilled and professional armed forces personnel there are. From counterterrorism missions to training and capacity building to helping to enforce UN sanctions, the Canadian Armed Forces plays a central role in upholding international peace and security. When the now Deputy Prime Minister outlined her vision for Canada's foreign policy approach back in 2017, she noted the principled use of force, together with our allies and governed by international law, is part of our history and must be part of our future. Simply put, Madam Speaker, having a strong and capable fighting force is critical to Canada's diplomatic presence internationally, and that is why our government has been making critical, smart investments into our forces. In addition to increasing spending by 70% between 2017 and 2026 to ensure our armed forces have the right people, the right equipment, and training to do the difficult tasks we ask of them. As part of these efforts, the Prime Minister and our Minister of National Defence have indicated that they are exploring options to further increase our investment in defence. Madam Speaker, we're proud of Canada's reputation across the globe as a source of stability and a significant diplomatic presence. At the same time, we know that having a robust, well-funded and well-supported military helps us maintain our seat at the table. The Canadian Armed Forces is a vital part of Canada's efforts abroad. I know our allies and partners are grateful for the support of our people in uniform, and I know Canadians are proud of them as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member of Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first off, my thanks to the Parliamentary Secretary. I take his words at heart. I know he's a strong advocate for our Canadian Armed Forces and for our veterans, having sat on the Veterans Affairs Committee with them in the last Parliament. However, Madam Speaker, I'm actually disappointed. My question was directed to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The whole question was directed at her actions, not the government, not the Parliamentary Secretary, but her specifically, about why will she recognize how good our Canadian Armed Forces personnel. So, simple question, Madam Speaker. I'll ask the Parliamentary Secretary to take that message back, because I've had other Liberal MPs apologize on her behalf. I want her to actually state in this House how good our military personnel are. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Although military intervention must always be a last resort, we know we need a robust and well-equipped armed forces to keep our country and Canadians safe, to show solidarity and support to our allies and partners, and to deploy in the direst of circumstances where peace and prosperity feel far out of reach. Canada's military power supports our work in diplomacy and international development. The reverse, Madam Speaker, is also true. By staying engaged with the like-minded partners off the battlefield, we're better prepared to mount a united front against destabilizing and dividing forces and share important knowledge, skills, and resources. Our diplomatic and military efforts are inseparable, and together are vital to upholding Canada's peace around the world. Thank you, Madam Speaker.